ladies and gentlemen, it is with mixed feelings that I leave this fantastic institution. The first feeling is one of enormous relief. I will not have the usual pile of briefs at 6 a.m. awaiting me. I will still wake up at 6 a.m. by force of habit, but for the first time will be able to do what an ordinary citizen does. I have belonged to this institution now for I don't know how many years. I came here in 1979. Those were fantastic days. I still remember we had outstanding judges, and as young people at the bar, we used to go and sit in Justice Krishna Iyer's court more than anybody else's. He had sparkling eyes. He was a genius. And he was unfailingly courteous to every single member of the bar. So one learnt a lot from Justice Krishna Iyer as to how to be a genius, how to be patient, and how at the same time to be unfailingly courteous when members of the bar address you. I still remember an interesting incident. Some lawyer was going on and on about, in a criminal case, about an alibi. And Justice Krishna politely said no once, no the second time. Finally looked at him and said, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Dismissed. Apart from this, I was very fortunate in that I was able to attend 3 mammoth cases in that 1 year before I went to Harvard. And I was able to see at very close quarters 5 of the giants of our profession. I was very fortunate that I was the only person briefed with the great Nani Palkhiwala in the first Minerva Mills case, which as all of you know, dealt with what was left of Mrs. Gandhi's amendment, the great 42nd amendment, namely Article 31C and 368, 4 and 5. The forensic brilliance that I saw in those, 25 days or so, I have never seen since. This man's greatness was that he spoke with extreme simplicity. Anybody could understand. His thoughts were exceptionally clear. And above all, he buttressed whatever he argued with example after example, to lead to the inexorable conclusion to which he was leading. I remember at one stage of the proceedings, Justice Untwalia, who was a little garrulous, kept on and on at him and kept saying, look, Mr. Palkhiwala, you are preaching capitalism. We have chosen the path of socialism. We heard him out and afterwards said, has your lordship quite finished? So Justice Untwalia said, yes. So he said, not even a lunatic, and he shouted the word so that everybody jumped, would ever dream of crossing the wall from West Berlin to East Berlin. Now, it was this kind of advocacy which one never ever saw. It was so effective, it was so brilliant. I was very fortunate to assist him in that case. And opposing us was none other than the learned Attorney General at that time, Lal Narayan Sinha, and the very young additional Solicitor General, Shri K.K. Venugopal. Now, I remember Venugopal's contribution to that case was that he painstakingly went through the entire gamut of acts of Parliament and segregated a whole number of them in order to point out that a very large number would be outside the ambit of 31C, and that therefore Palkhiwala was painting a false picture. Fortunately for us, that painstaking research did not lead to a result in his favor. As a result of which, basic structure got reinstated. 368, 4 and 5 were knocked down by all the judges, and 31C as amended knocked down by 4 out of 5 judges, Justice Bhagwati dissenting. The other great matter which I attended was Swadeshi Cotton Mills versus the Union of India. At that time, my father was for the petitioner and Soli Sorabji, Solicitor General, was for the respondent, the union. And by a 2-1 verdict, my father succeeded. Section 18AA of the IDR Act, Industries Development Regulation Act, was the issue, and the actual issue was as to whether natural justice needed to be observed before management was taken over. 2 out of the 3 judges sided with my father, Justice Chinnappa Reddy dissenting. And it was a very great victory for him. Ultimately, of course, it turned out to be Pyrrhic, because they said, notwithstanding that audi alteram partem had not been followed, yet they would give a post-decisional hearing under Section 18 capital D. The third fantastic case was the celebrated Needle Industries case. And Needle Industries went through 2 sets of hearings. The first was before Justices Utwalia and Pathak, who differed. And at the second hearing, we had a high-power bench, Chief Justice Chandrachud, Justice Bhagwati, and Justice Venkatachaliah. There again, my father showed his forensic brilliance. His opponent was the great Sirvai. Sirvai unfortunately floundered around because he had cataracts at that point of time and wasn't at his effective best. I'm told that my father's most outstanding abilities as an advocate were that he was able to divine the judge's mind and instantly, therefore, respond to the judge as he expected a response. So there we have 3 outstanding pillars of the advocates. 4, in fact, the young Venugopal as well. And as I told you, unfortunately, Mr. Sirvai, who was one of the greatest and most formidable in his day, was at that point of time not really up to it. After this great year, first year, I went to Harvard, studied at Harvard, practiced in New York, as you've been told, then went to the Mumbai High Court and studied there and practiced there for about 3 years. And I came back in 1986 to join the chambers of K.K. Venugopal. K.K. Venugopal at that point had lost his wife and was in deep sorrow. He was a most devoted husband, father, and a most devoted senior. I cannot thank him enough. We learned so much with him. And the senior juniors at that point, that is C.S. Vaidyanathan and Krishnamani, were both outstanding lawyers and outstanding individuals. They helped me a lot. I learned a lot in that chamber. And I was loath to leave it after about a year and a half. But I have maintained excellent relations with all 3 of them. As I have told you, I consider the learned Attorney General to be my guru for life. After leaving Shri Venugopal, I managed to develop a reasonable practice here. And now I come to the next great name in my career, Chief Justice Venkatachaliah. It is he who picked me up at a very young age. And it is he who really propelled me into becoming what I became as a senior advocate, and albeit about 8 years before my time. I still remember in court number 3 at that point, he was heading a bench with Justice R.C. Patnaik, the judge who unfortunately got killed in an accident. And he had just decided that expenditure tax matter. Expenditure tax went up from 10% to 20%. So there was another writ petition challenging the hike. My father led a battery of lawyers, me right at the end. And I recall my having really worked hard in order to show that Justice Venkatachaliah's judgment had a loophole in it. It was a constitution bench. And the loophole was that you can't pit a residuary entry against an entry in list 2 in the 7th schedule. You can only pit an entry with a subject matter, not an entry with no subject matter. And for that purpose, I remember, I had pulled out a passage in Lefroy's Canadian constitutional law. Fortunately for me, Justice Venkatachaliah had cited one para and missed the second, which had stated exactly this. So I showed all this to my father. Father got up. Venkatachaliah said, what is this Nariman now? Is this covered? My father looked around and said, yeah, it's covered. It was the end of it. Apparently, I showed great shock, and the learned judge saw it. He said nothing at the time, but I got a message at lunchtime that Justice Venkatachaliah is calling you back to court. Mind you, he called only me back. At 2 o'clock, he said, Mr. Nariman, there was some discomfiture. What was the trouble? Was there something wrong? So I said, in my usual, blasé fashion, I said, yes. So I said, what was wrong? Are you telling us our judgment is not right? I said, yes. So he looked at me and he said, tell us why it is not right. So I told him about Lefroy and the research I had done. He recalled the order and issued notice. Unimaginable. Huh? After he recalled the order and issued notice, he told me, I'll be very interested in your research. You have to give me a written argument by yourself. I don't want it from anybody else. And I will then consider as to whether my judgment is or is not correct. Most unfortunately, 2 weeks later, Parliament retracted and 20% became 10%. There went my research, and there stands the judgment. After Chief Justice Venkatachaliah made me a senior way before my time, I appeared before a number of judges, some of whom were outstandingly good to me, some of whom were outstanding judges. Chief Justice Ahmadi, for example, was one of our most outstanding judges. He had somehow a practical common sense by which he would invariably arrive at the correct result. He was also an excellent hearer of counsel. He didn't allow too much leeway. At the same time, he didn't stop anybody short. And he gave the junior a little more leeway than the senior. So all these were important learning experiences for me. Justice Kuldeep Singh, another direct appointee from the bar, was a very dear friend. And though brusque, rough and difficult, he was also a very good judge. And again, with a robust common sense, so that he arrived usually at the correct solution. I'll give you an instance of what happened in his court once. Vinod Bobde, my dearest friend at the bar, who I miss very, very much today, was opposing me in some water cess matter. And it was covered in my favor by a judgment of Justice Sabyasachi Mukherjee. The municipality wanted to question the correctness of that judgment. And Bhimrao Naik, who was a very dear friend also, appeared for the municipality together with Vinod. And Bhimrao Naik argued for around 45 minutes to an hour and didn't make any headway. At the end of that, Kuldeep Singh started his dictation. Vinod got up and said in his inimitable and very mild style, Your Lordship, give me just 2 minutes. So Kuldeep Singh smiled at him and said, yes, Mr. Bobde, certainly. Bobde spoke, sentence 1, sentence 2. Sentence 3, there was trouble. By sentence 4, big trouble. By sentence 5, all over. In 5 sentences, he demonstrated how Mukherjee's judgment was wrong. And then came, yes, Mr. Nariman. And Mr. Nariman couldn't support. These are great memories of yesteryear. I can only tell you, I'm flooded with so many of them just now that I could go on and on. But let's fast forward a little. And now come to the stage at which I became Solicitor General. For this, I have Kapil Sibal alone to thank. Kapil was always partial to me, and somehow or the other braved the other elements in the Congress stronghold, including the then Attorney General. And finally, it was agreed that if they could find somebody better than me, they would take him. They didn't find somebody better, so I became Solicitor General. At this stage, I must also tell you that I really miss, like I miss Vinod today, my dearest friend Arun Jaitley. Arun again was such a darling of a human being. He was such a great man. And he was such a dignified lawyer. I don't think I've come across a more dignified advocate than him. I have seen his rise from zero. I have seen him as a Tisazari lawyer. I have seen him rush to get a senior when my father was not available in the Indian Express case here before Justice A.P. Sen. And I must tell you that as a lawyer, let alone as a minister and whatever he became later, he was always exceptionally well prepared and exceptionally dignified. He was outstanding. I also look back with the greatest love, if I may say so, to two of the early judges, Justices A.P. Sen and Justice Chinnappa Reddy, as you've just been told. Justice A.P. Sen, in fact, was like a father to me in court. He would poke fun at me. He would encourage me. And as he was about to retire, I appeared in some matter before him. I didn't have much of a role, so I said 2 sentences. At the end of 2 sentences, I sat down. Justice Sen then said, "Mr. Nariman, don't you have something else to say?" I said, "No, my lord, I don't have much of a role here." He said, "Say something, say something. This is the last time I'm going to hear your voice in court." You know, he said it almost pathetically. And that evening, I got a phone call from him, in which he started out by saying, "All roads lead to Rome." I said, "I don't understand." He repeated. Then he said, "Look, if anybody requires Western classical music in this city, he has to come to you. I love Western classical music. And because I love Western classical music, you will therefore dub cassettes for me." At this stage, the learned Chief Justice has to leave because he has to catch a flight. So I'll just wind up after 10 minutes. Thank you very much. So, Justice A.P. Sen then would insist on cassettes being sent to me. He would never accept a blank cassette from me. A blank cassette would be sent, I would have to dub whatever he wanted. And only then would he accept this gift from me. And this went on throughout his life because we kept up long after he retired as a judge. Justice Chinnappa Reddy also was a great mentor to me, indeed to all young people. And that's something I learned from both of them again. I remember I argued Prakash Amichan Shah before a constitution bench, being fielded by your veteran president, Mr. Praveen Parekh. Now, Praveen braved all odds to field an absolutely raw junior because the senior had suddenly disappeared from the scene. And the bench was an extremely difficult bench to deal with, particularly property rights. Chinnappa Reddy heading it, Justice Eraddi on one side, Justice Venkatramaya on one side, and then Justices R.B. Mishra and Justice Khalid. So anyway, he told the clients that, look, at this last minute, we cannot brief any senior. This boy is ready. I will risk him. So he risked me. And I got up and I remember I started off with a general sort of bhashan on property rights. All of them endured me for about an hour because they saw this young man, let's encourage him. And at the end of an hour, Justice Eraddi then asked me a question. It was a very tricky question. So I answered very cheekily saying, this is like, have you stopped beating your wife? If I say this, you will say this. If I say this, you will immediately berate me and say this. So everybody laughed. And they allowed me somehow or the other to carry on for about 2 whole days. And that experience, that very early experience and the confidence that it gave me, thanks to that bench, And thanks in particular to the presiding officer of that bench, Justice Chinnappa Reddy, again held me in very good stead, long afterwards. We now come to Chief Justice Lodha, who again did the greatest possible service to me by making me do a public service in turn. I remember he became Chief Justice and he insisted that I accept judgeship. He said, "You accepted now." So I said, "Chief, it's not possible to say now." He said, "No, now. I'm not giving you any opportunity to look back." I said, "I need to consult my wife at least." He said, "No, I'll deal with her." So I said, "You don't know what a Parsi wife is. How can you deal with her? You don't have one." Then I said, "What about my parents?" So he said, No, I'll deal with your father. Don't worry." I said, "My parents." I didn't say my father. So again he said, "No, I will not accept no." So finally I said, "All right, you give me till tomorrow morning. I promise you I'll come back." I consulted them. They all said, "Yes, why not? I mean, it's some new phase in your career." And I went back and said, "Yes, true." And that's how by accident I became a judge. And these 7 years have been the most grueling, difficult years of my life. I can tell you, it is no cakewalk. When I was this side, I had no concept of what it was to be on the other side. Let me tell you. And now having been on both sides, this side is much more difficult. You have to read much more. In fact, on one of my very early, probably the second week of my judicial career, Mukul appeared, another good friend. And Mukul, as usual, had his 20 briefs or 25 briefs or whatever. And I said, "Mr. Rohatgi, today I have beaten you hollow. To your 20 or 25, I have 65. I can't say that I've enjoyed every minute of being a judge. It's been very hard work. Certainly enjoyed writing judgments. But at the end of it all, it's worked out well. And coming back to what Vikas Singh was telling the Chief Justice, I also believe that nobody has any legitimate expectation to come to this court. Nobody. I believe there is a legitimate expectation in the people of India and the litigating public to get a certain quality of justice from this final court. For that, it is very clear merit must predominate, subject, of course, to other factors. But merit always comes first. And I would second Shri Vikas Singh in saying that it is time more direct appointees were elevated to this bench. I would also say and exhort those direct appointees who are asked never to say no. It is their solemn duty, having reaped so much from the profession, to give back. Very important. The time has now come for the vote of thanks. I have to thank everybody around me. I couldn't have functioned as a judge without help from every quarter. Above all, I have to thank Messrs. Chawla and Narula, my secretaries. I have to thank my entire staff. I have to thank the court staff, the court masters. I have to thank my law clerks, each of whom has had to suffer me for a year and more. And of course, I cannot end without thanking the one man who has been with me on all my campaigns, Narayan Verma, since 1989, and who will continue, I suppose, with me till he or I shuffle off this mortal coil. Thank you all very much. I will miss all of you. It's a very unreal thing not to be able to step in or not to step in now to this institution which I have belonged to for so many years. God bless the Supreme Court now and always. Thank you all very much.